Before we go on the record in this case, I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. We talked about all of them at the pre-hearing conference, so there shouldn't be anything new here. I am the lead judge on this case. My co-equal partners on the panel are Judge Neil Robinson and Judge Sarah Hosey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to ask the parties to just introduce themselves, starting with taxpayer.
The taxpayer is Mr. Leslie W. Billings, spelled like we get in the mail every month, and what we're talking about this morning.
Okay.
For the Franchise Tax Board, it's Brad Catino. The spelling of my last name is Coutinho, and to my right is Natasha Page.
Okay. I'm just going to reiterate that the Office of Tax Appeals is an independent organization. We are separate from both the Franchise Tax Board and the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. So we're here for the purpose of making an independent review of this case after the hearing and resulting in a decision. The issue that we discussed was whether the appellants have shown that they are entitled to deduct unreimbursed employee business expenses and home office deductions for the year 2012.
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's
Yes.
correct. Okay, and we had discussed Mr. Billings' Exhibits 1 through 12 and Franchise Tax Board's Exhibits A through C at the pre-hearing conference, and neither side intends to submit anything in addition to that. Is that correct?
I just have one question on the examples or what they have submitted from the standpoint, is that the material in the letters that they have sent me is what those exhibits are, or is there something else?
No, it was all submitted because
Okay.
that's where we pulled the list.
Okay.
And, yeah,
I just wanted to clarify, make sure.
okay. And knowing that, do you have any objection to any of those?
The only one objection I have is the one mileage section of worksheet that was encouraged by the previous auditor and the previous tax employee that my understanding is no longer in the audit department, is that he encouraged the taxpayer to just go out online and do something. So there is an addition that was submitted in the train of letters back and forth that I would probably object to, because the list I already provided is substantial enough to explain all the addresses that were driven to.
Okay, so to the extent that it has value in the decision, are you saying that you want us, I have it marked as Exhibit 12.
Right. The only concern that I have as a taxpayer is that it presents two different totals because of the original submission with the tax on 2012, and then the audit that occurred afterwards was encouraged by the auditor himself to go out and do. It is not mileage IQ, it is the other mileage compiled report. So if that is item 12, then that's fine. I just want to make sure that that was in addition to, because I was trying to do what the employee wanted.
Okay, so if there's no objection, we'll just go ahead and admit them. Is there an objection by Franchise Tax Board?
Sorry, I'm not quite understanding an
Do
objection.
you object to any of?
Appellant's exhibits?
Appellant's exhibits.
We do not.
Including exhibit number 12.
We do not object.
Okay.
Okay, so when we go on the record, I'll just submit those into evidence. And Mr. Billings, do you object to Franchise Tax Board's Exhibits A through C?
Can you give me the titles on those, please?
2012 income tax return, the notice of proposed assessment, and the FTB's comments list was with the logged phone calls.
I think that's why we're here, is because I do object and I want reconsideration.
You object to the contents, not the exhibit itself, right?
No, I just object to their decision.
Okay. All right, then I'll take that as not objecting to having those exhibits into evidence. So we're going to go on the record now. And once again, this is the appeal of Leslie and Carol Billings. It's case number 18011078. The date is May 23rd, 2019, and it's 10:16 a.m. in Fresno, California. For the record, I am the lead judge for today's hearing. I'm Teresa Stanley, and I have Judge Neil Robinson and Judge Sarah Hosey with me. They will be equally participating. They can ask questions if they need to. And once again, for the record, will you please identify yourself?
Yes, the taxpayer's identification is Leslie, Leslie, W for my middle initial, Billings, spelled B as in boy, I, N as in Nancy, G, S as in Sam.
And you are representing both you and your wife.
It is a
correct,
it
Mrs.
is a
Billings?
joint tax return, so yes.
Okay, thank you. And Franchise Tax Board?
Brad Catino and Natasha Page for the Franchise Tax Board.
Thank you. And feel free to ask if you have any questions as we go along. We are going to admit into evidence this morning appellants Exhibits 1 through 12 and respondents Exhibits A through C. The issue that we're going to decide will be whether appellants have shown that they are entitled to deduct unreimbursed employee business expenses and home office deductions for the 2012 taxable year. We're going to start. Mr. Billings, you did request 5 minutes to explain what you intend to show us today. An opening statement is, without
Understand that,
testifying to
Mrs.
facts.
Stanley. Thank you, Your
Okay,
Honor.
so I'll go ahead and give you your first opening statement.
My statement is this. The employer that I formerly worked for did not reimburse the expenses needed for the job required duties throughout the Central Valley areas. That can include Palmdale, Lancaster, Bishop, Mammoth, Santa Barbara, Lompoc, all the way up to as far as Stockton and into other Chowchilla, Madera, Modesto, Fresno, and then other outlying areas. They do not reimburse the employee for that. They only pay the client-approved mileage, which is restricted by location and how much is charged in a cap. That is based upon the employment agreement that I had with them, and the expenses that I have put in the 2012 tax return were given to the tax preparer as listed on the tax documents that are exhibited, and he requested those to be totaled through the bank charges, through the receipts that were provided, through the payments to the claimed needed services. Those were really not reimbursed. And in question is the tax franchise board saying that they are not qualified. I have nothing else to offer other than my employer didn't pay. And if you want to hold me to my employer's standard, I'm going to ask a question about that because I'm not the employer. I'm the employee. They don't pay. This is my last request from that standpoint on the tax submitted documents. I'm not a tax legal professional, period. I do not talk legalese. I do not talk tax specific law. If there is any help that can be granted or assisted with, I am happy to answer the questions that the judges may have. Thank you for your time, and thank you for driving down here from Sacramento. I apologize for my 5-minute late. I was up at the old equalization board office, so I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you. Mr. Catino?
Respondent would waive opening statements and just would like to make its argument.
Okay, we'll wait till closing argument then.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll let Mr. Billings go into the details of how the client contracts work. And are you still going to discuss also your home office deductions?
If that's allowable, yes. I work from home.
Okay.
And if there are specific requirements that he is saying is not met, then I need to understand what they're presenting, other than coming back to say, well, we sent you a letter, we told you it didn't work, and that's why we're here for the appeal.
Okay, so let me just swear you in so that then we can take testimony that's official.
Okay, and can I ask a question on that, just before we
Certainly.
do it? Doesn't my tax documents that are exhibited in the evidence produce the same oath that you're about to ask me for?
Your tax documents are signed under penalty of perjury.
Correct.
What I'm going to ask you today, well, if you don't mind taking the oath, that's the only way we can get testimony under the record, under the laws that we operate
Or
under.
abide by? Okay.
So I'm just going to ask if you're telling the truth today. So if you don't mind taking that oath.
I don't mind
I'd
taking the oath, but I
appreciate
just wanted to make sure that it was noted that I've already signed an oath for the
Right.
tax return.
Correct.
So.
I understand.
I just want to make sure that that's aware, because this is 7 years ago, and the documents that he has and that are in the evidence, you're going to ask me questions, how do you come to the total? I'm happy to discuss that, which is, go
Okay.
look at all my charges. So let's raise the hand and
Let
let's
us-
go.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in this proceeding?
Yes, ma'am.
There we go. Okay. Now you can go into all the details that you want the judges to be able to consider, because we will get a transcript of the testimony, and so we'll have all that when we're deliberating.
Okay. I'm a W-2 employee. The contracts that the employer negotiates without any involvement of the employee, said me, the taxpayer, requires the employee to drive in addition to what is paid for mileage. The W-2s that are in the exhibits on part of the tax returns do have a total that is listed on the W-2 form. That is the maximum amount of mileage and/or expense that was approved to pay based upon client contractual obligations. So if, I will use an example, if you live in Sacramento and you have to drive to Fresno, and that client does not pay for mileage greater than 100 miles round trip, the mileage from Sacramento to Fresno would equal what? It would equal a certain total. You would subtract out the $100, and that is what is left that I am paying out of my own pocket for maintenance of the vehicle, gas costs, oil changes, DMV fees, tires, just the normal maintenance, which is why the tax code allows for consideration as an individual when businesses do not pay. On the office, I work from home. There is a substantial area that is set aside to take care of business, which is printer, desk, laptop, and then paper supplies and such. Maximum by, I think my understanding is 300 square feet is the maximum that can be taken. That's per regulations, that's per what my tax guy says. So all the expenses that have been listed out are what I am considering as justified expenses for maintaining the business office at home, driving the mileage that I have to do for the employer's work duties for every claim assignment assigned through the period of 1 year. Any questions?
Judge Hosey, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have one question. So you were reimbursed the client-approved amount.
Yes.
How is that amount determined? Did you have a contract with each client? or-
Yes, ma'am. There's an individual contractual agreement with the employer, say whether it's Liberty Mutual, AAA, State Farm, Home Site, Fireman's Fund. All those companies have their own set of rules. That rule is given to the assignment person, which is the claim adjuster. That claim adjuster then has to use their own vehicle to drive from that point A to point B, inspect the loss, take the photos, do the reports, whether on-site or at the office, produce the estimate, and then drive home to the location. That is per client. So if I get 5 different companies, there are 5 sets of rules. And this is how the business operates, and I have no control as an employee on what is paid by that corporation.
Okay, it's
It's
predetermined.
it's preset. It's a fee-based structure, which says this client has 75 miles. So after 75 miles of driven, you can charge up to 150 miles. So if I'm driving from Bakersfield to Santa Barbara, I'm only going to get paid for 150 miles.
Okay,
I'm not going to get paid for
the
and
remainder.
the full amount. So basically, if I drive 1,000 miles for a client, and that client says I only pay 400 miles, I have a 600-mile loss as an individual.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
You're welcome.
Robinson?
I have a couple of questions. You, in 2012, you're working for Eagle Adjusting Services?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the contracts that you're talking about, were they contracts with you individually or between the insurance companies and Eagle?
Eagle and the insurance companies. The employee relationship that I had was W-2. There's 1099 or W-2. That's how they would organize them. I was a W-2. They would handle the taxes that was deducted from the, earned income. They would handle the back office portion of that in the sense of FICA, Social Security, those items that are deducted out of each paycheck. But the expense side is, here's the other contract for this client. We've negotiated this rate. If you write a $5,000 estimate, you get this payment. Then you have mileage, and if they pay for phones or they pay for photos, that would be dictated in those instructions.
What was the process for you to go through in order to get reimbursed?
The process with the company for
Yes.
the actual file, I would generate an invoice for each individual claim assignment. That was then assigned. So if I lived in Bakersfield and they said, hey, we have a loss in Paso Robles, here's the claim number, here's the address, here's the location, here's the loss, and some of the facts, please go write an estimate. And then you generate the mileage from point A to point B, and then point B to point A, and you put it on the invoice which says, this company says you have to deduct 75 miles for this claim. How many miles did you drive? Well, I drove 325. Well, this client also has a cap that it only pays up to 100 miles, period. So.
Okay, but what's confusing to me a little bit
It's okay.
is, who are you invoicing?
I'm invoicing the insurance company
Okay,
that is processed by Eagle's back office. So I submit the report, the invoice, and everything to Eagle Adjusting, who then either approves it or rejects it, saying, hey, you need to tweak something on your report, you misspelled the word estimate, or you needed to change the mileage because they only pay for such. That supervisor at Eagle sends it back to me, then I send it back to the supervisor, then that supervisor sends it off to the client. So it's individually written on every file.
and so it's from that invoice that you're paid, you're reimbursed by Eagle?
Through the client, because they say client reimbursable mileage is the only thing that they will pay. So, and it sounds labor intensive, it is. So if I did 332 claims that year, I would have 332 invoices for those individual claims, which then would be looked at and reviewed. If I'm going to the same area in the same day, where I have 2 appointments in Paso Robles, then I can't bill twice for it. I have to prorate it, and I have to then split what they will cover between the 2 claim assignments in that location.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything that I'm not making clear, because it's convoluted?
Well, I think you answered my question.
Okay, thank you,
you.
Mr. Robinson.
Yeah, and I have a couple of follow-up questions, starting with what Judge Robinson was talking about. Does that mean your W-2 also includes those reimbursements?
Yes, the W-2 will have a line section, and I'm going to reference between 7,000 and 9,000 because I can try to look on my actual W-2, because I think this is 2012.
Is that one of our exhibits?
It is.
Exhibit A.
Yeah. Please excuse me while I get my readers.
No, it's Exhibit 2. Oh, it's Exhibit 2.
Isn't this it?
Oh, yeah, he's got a more extensive one.
So, we have wages and tips, then we have federal income, then we have Social Security on the W-2, Medicare. Then we have a section down in the and this is what I was referring to, was the 9,403, but that's the federal income tax. And the only question that I have is that there's an amount that was on a W-2 that I'm thinking of that was like $9,000 that says here's what your mileage was for that year, and that may be on an individual pay stub, which is not included in here, nor do I have. So,
Do you have the ability to get that?
it's possible. They've changed so many payrolls in the 7 years that I was there. I think we had a total of 3. We switched from company to company to company as their corporation changed repeatedly. So,
We'll come back to this and see if it's something worth holding the record open for after
Sure.
the hearing, but it may be that if you had a pay stub near the end of the year, at or near the end of the year, that it would show that
right.
pretty closely. Okay. And then, when you were telling Judge Robinson that you have invoices for 320-some clients in a given year, would that show how much that client reimbursed versus how much mileage you use?
Yeah, we're looking for a comparison, and
Yeah.
is what you're looking for. Yes, but since it's individually billed, that becomes the ownership of the corporation, is my understanding. It's part of their work product.
Right.
So, do I have those invoices? Yes. My former employer, we are not in good terms at this point, and there are proceedings that are occurring. So, me getting something from them is probably nil.
Okay.
In relation to some of the same subject matters that we're discussing.
Okay. And is there any way, so I'm looking at the exhibit number 12 that you said that you created for the auditor, but I wanted to understand that because I was trying to see if that shows a difference in pay versus mileage, because you have column F that shows the number of miles, and then you have column G that shows miles value. Is the miles value the amount of your reimbursement?
Okay, and on that Exhibit 12, I don't have everything with me. So is there a way that I could look at that just to, I'll give
Sure.
it back. I will not take it with me
Sure.
at all.
Dana can hand it to me.
I don't have enough funds to create the 5 copies needed, I'm sorry. Yes, this is the exhibit that I was reviewing. This was what was encouraged by the auditor, and you can try to use it as comparison, but the total number of miles driven was based upon the individual cities from the home office, which I believe was based out of Bakersfield that year, which I think we had recently moved due to my wife's employer consolidating down back to Bakersfield. So in relation to this data point, I would say this is not the original from 2012, because the auditor basically said, just go out online and figure out something. And so in my attempt to try to be helpful, it's not the full report.
You're referencing another mileage report that maybe you gave to Franchise Tax Board or the auditor, but that we don't have in our records?
Is there a mileage IQ report? That is, look on the web page or look on the report pages that say mileage IQ.
Actually, I can get into the online file and search for that.
Because Mileage IQ had just come out as an app for tracking mileage that you could base on your cell phone. And so I paid that fee for, the use and the easier tracking method.
And would that have a value that shows the reimbursed?
No, because it was only 3 to 4 months of 2012 towards the latter part. It did not include the entire year.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Okay, so, but this one does. And
That
this
one does, and I just know that it's probably short in the full scope of mileage that's there.
Okay.
That's my concern as a taxpayer.
And I know you gave back the copy, but when this
Go
does
ahead.
give at least some indication of
Mm-hmm.
location, where you traveled.
Is
But-
there also a Eagle adjusting claims list that is part of the exhibits?
I don't think so. Let me do my scan.
Because that I do have down in my car. But again, not 5 copies. And it's my master copy, so.
Okay, I'm almost there. Thank
yeah.
you.
I think
real
it might
time.
be,
Is it Exhibit 4?
I think it might be,
Yeah, it says Rise Claim
Exhibit
Solutions.
4 on Helen's
Exhibit
Okay.
4. Here you go. That's yours. That's the claim listing for the addresses driven
You
to.
want to see it?
Sure.
Oh, okay, yeah. This is the
They
one that this is a better one because it has the actual
That-
location that you traveled to.
Yes, ma'am.
So you can verify the mileage based on the location you
Based on
traveled to and from.
based on the address to and from. The one thing on this report is there was some corporations that would assign that were based out of Texas and/or a different state. I'm not going to drive to Texas. The address that was handled for that claim was probably in the Central Valley, like Palmdale, Bakersfield, Fresno, Madera. And that address was based upon that report, not the Texas mileage.
Okay. But again, none of this ties back to that one piece that we need to know how much each client reimbursed
No,
versus.
because that is their work product and their negotiation, and sharing that publicly can create arrears for various subject matters. And I can give possible examples. I do have those, but they are not with me because of the ongoing proceedings separate of this. I would probably have to talk to my attorney to ask him for approval before sharing. And that, the only reason why is because it's concerning the ongoing proceedings.
Okay. But you do believe that your pay stub, if you can find that, would show how much mileage you were reimbursed for the whole
Yeah.
year? And so that could be a potential comparison point to what you say you used.
What the
travel
actual
these locations.
driven miles were compared to what Eagle/Rise paid. That's what you're looking for, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, and I did have another question regarding the home office deductions, because
ma'am.
I believe you had not provided any documentation to show what your expenses were that you were counting, and whether they were included in your contract or not included, like a telephone.
Right, and those were given to the tax preparer from the standpoint of and they are also reflected in the bank statements that were provided in part of the exhibits. There are internet charges that are monthly, there are cell phone charges, there are, this is where I'm not a tax guy, so if somebody asks me, hey, give me all your expenses, here's my utilities bills, here's my water bill, here's my gas bill, you're the tax professional, I pay you to handle this. And if he doesn't include it, he doesn't include it. If he does, then he's done a formula as per what the state of California requires him to be. Because he's a lot smarter than me and he's a lot older than me, and all I can do is rely on him. So,
And then your employment agreement does have an addendum, so at some time during that year, they changed the reimbursements, right?
yeah, that was in the change of Eagle to Rise, and the employees were required to sign the addendum or not work for them anymore. That was their presentation. But the habit of already being employed for 3 years and then strongly encouraged by the individual managers and other employees, please keep track of your mileage and put everything on your taxes, because we're not basically going to pay you.
Okay. And I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
For Mr. Catino this
Oh,
time.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to let him answer a question. For the mileage and for the reimbursements, what does the Franchise Tax Board believe that they would need in addition to what we already have to show that he qualifies for at least some of the reimbursement?
Yes, in regards to the auto mileage, while respondent can appreciate that his former employer and employee aren't on good relationships, it's those invoices that he mentioned that would show how much he's been reimbursed from his employer and then the difference of how many miles he's driven total. So whether it be that W-2, or whether it be the W-2 statement that shows how much he's been reimbursed total, and then how much the difference between the miles driven and how much he's been reimbursed. If he can establish that, that would help establish some of the auto mileage. Also, I understand that he's provided the mileage log that provides some of the mileage driven, and it just seems to be if it could be reconciled with, okay, these are the trips I took. This is my, a good faith estimate of how many miles were driven to that location, and this is how much I didn't get reimbursed from my employer. That would help establish that for the auto mileage reimbursement.
Okay, but given that he's not in privity on these contracts, you think that there's nothing that can be done in place of that?
Unfortunately, the way the law regarding from the Treasury regulations and the IRS code, the burden is on the employee, the taxpayer, to substantiate the deductions claimed. And so I understand in this situation it's unfortunate based on the relationship between the employer and employee. Unfortunately, it is the burden of the taxpayer to establish records.
Okay.
Your Honor?
Go
or
ahead.
Mrs. Stanley, thank you for asking that question, because the mechanism that's being asked for, that was what was provided to the tax preparer. It's been provided to them in a form that they are rejecting because it's either too difficult or too hard, or is going to take too many hours to do. I don't have an understanding of why they are asking that, other than they want to use this definition, but I've produced the information which is showing that, and they're saying, no, you still need to produce more. So even after I produce this, if I can, I still feel the answer is already biased.
Okay, except that we're the ones that are going to be.
I'm not saying
reviewing
you
it
are
now.
biased, I'm saying the process is. I'm saying the process is already set, that I've already done this once with my tax preparer. Now I've done it a second time and a third time, and they're still wanting more. And that's where I'm an individual. It is my responsibility to prove. All I can tell you is the God honest truth. If I have an address on that exhibit from Rise Claims that says this is the address that this claim is at, and my home office is here, you're basically telling me, the tax board is, we don't believe you. We don't believe that you got in your car, you took your photos, you took the time, you drove through the gas, filled up the gas, you put new tires on your vehicle. They are saying that I have given over false information, and that anything that I tell them is not going to be accepted. That's where I'm stuck at. I don't know what else to say.
Okay. Judge Hosey, do you have any follow-up questions?
No, I think you've clarified. Thank you so much.
Judge Robinson?
No further questions.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead then and let you give your closing argument if you want to say anything more to us.
And I'm trying not to repeat myself. The only thing is I feel that if the burden is on me to be responsible, I've been responsible and I've put forth the good faith discussion points that have been asked for. All the deductions were given to the tax preparer in good faith. They were given to the state in good faith. And simply put, they're telling me you have no mechanism, Les, that says we're going to accept it. We feel that the $2,000 is still owed. They won't come back with any assistance to say, this is what we specifically need. So you're going to throw darts at the dartboard to guess which is the right document to give us. Like I said before, I'm not a tax preparer. I'm not a tax person. I work hard, just like you guys. You guys wake up early to come down here. I do the same. And I respect your time. Again, apologize for being late. I respect their time as they're professionals. It is just frustrating as a tax person that you do the honest, you tell the truth, you come to the table, and then they still say, well, no, you get more. You got to give more. I've given enough as possible. So if you want the invoices, I'll ask my attorney and see if he's willing to produce examples. Producing all 332, I will tell you, is probably going to be concerning to him. With the relationship to the mileage driven versus mileage claimed, I can look for the pay stub, the closest pay stub to the year end. I'm willing to do what is available, but I'm still concerned as a taxpayer that if I've paid my taxes, I've given all the documentation that I have, and it doesn't meet your format, and I can't find out that format, I'm confused. I apologize. So thank you for listening to me, all three of you, and the note taker. Thank you for driving down here from Sacramento, for all of you, unless you're local, which I don't know if you are or you're all down here. So thank you for taking the time, and appreciate giving the opportunity to have the appeal listened to.
Thank you. Mr. Catino?
Good morning. As we know, this case is a case regarding substantiation of unreimbursed employee expenses. Deductions are a matter of legislative grace, and the taxpayer bears the burden of proving their entitlement to a deduction. Under Internal Revenue Code Section 6001, a taxpayer is required to maintain records sufficient to establish the amount of that deduction. Under IRS Treasury regulations, a taxpayer must substantiate each element of an expenditure or use by adequate records or by sufficient evidence corroborating his own statement. In this case, on their 2012 tax return, appellants claimed the following four categories for unreimbursed employee expenses. The first was telephone and internet, the second was cell phone, the third was business meals, and the fourth was auto mileage. In this case, there's two reasons why respondent's position currently is that appellant hasn't shown that they have substantiated to show that they are entitled to unreimbursed employee expenses. The first reason is that appellant husband's employment agreement appears to provide an avenue to provide some reimbursement for expenses that the employee has incurred for necessary business purposes. And the second reason is that the evidence provided by appellants does not appear to be complete, as it doesn't show what expenditures were for personal consumption and what expenditures were for business purpose. In regards to my first point, as shown on Exhibit 3 of appellant's statements, there's an employment agreement, and that employment agreement, as explained by appellant today, provides some reimbursement for auto mileage, for telephone and internet, and for cell phone, and it appears on the addendum to be at its sole discretion, appellant husband's employer may reimburse employee for any additional necessary and reasonable business expense pursuant to their reimbursement policy. In the record right now, there isn't a evidence regarding the travel expense and reimbursement policy and what information is contained in that policy. But based on the information here, it appears that there's some avenue for reimbursement. In regards to the auto mileage, as stated previously, what respondent is looking for is the amount that was reimbursed and then the difference between that and the mileage that appellant actually drove. That information would help substantiate what were unreimbursed employee expenses. There's a case on point in regards to this from the IRS. It's Howard versus Commissioner of Internal Revenue Service. And in that case, the U.S. Tax Court held when there's a policy or an agreement that allows for reimbursement, an employee must show that they sought reimbursement and were denied in order to be entitled to unreimbursed employee expenses. So what we're looking for is what expenses the employer did allow and which ones were not allowed. And from that, those could be determined what appellant husband would be entitled to for those unreimbursed employee expenses. In regards to, as stated earlier, regarding the telephone and internet, it appears to be there is some reimbursement permitted, and it's not clear which ones for cell phone and telephone were allowed by his employer and which ones were not. Evidence showing that he submitted expense reports regarding cell phone and telephone, and those were denied would be helpful in establishing whether or not appellant husband is entitled to those expenses. In regards to the second point, the evidence currently submitted doesn't provide a breakdown of what expenses were for personal consumption and which ones were for business use. For instance, appellant has provided an Excel spreadsheet and credit card statements to support business meals. However, it's not clear whether the breakdown was whether those were for personal use or whether those were for business purpose. Same with telephone and internet. While appellant has provided credit card statements to show the expenditures for telephone and internet, there's no breakdown that appellant husband has provided that would show which ones were for other family members or own personal use as opposed to for a business purpose. I'd be happy to address any other questions or concerns the panel may have. Thank you.
I think we're okay. You want to have the final word?
First of all, thank you if you did. So basically what I've just heard him say, and he can help correct if he needs to, is he's saying, Les, you have not shown, as by defined documents that you've submitted for that definition. But when he says that I've submitted a spreadsheet showing business meals, I would ask the judges, if you go to lunch today based upon the mileage that you've had to drive today, is that personal consumption or business consumption? I don't know that answer, personally. If I drive to Palmdale from Bakersfield, I'm actively in business mode. I have to go meet clients. I have to have sustenance. Am I meeting with a client and having lunch? No. I am in that particular area. If I need to eat lunch, I need to eat lunch. If that is personal consumption versus business consumption, I would like to get an understanding of what that is meant by, because that's not clear. So I would like to ask, what is the mileage that is customary to keep it custom, to keep it personal, versus what is the acceptable mileage driven for eating lunch or dinner at a location because it's 5 o'clock and I haven't eaten all day and I needed to be able to drive home the next 2.5 hours because that's what the day presented. I don't know that answer. So he gets the full report. He gets all the lunches, meals that were expended outside of, I would probably say, a 75-mile radius. Why 75 miles is because for some reason that's a normal client type of, in my world, that's something that the clients are basing their decisions on. So I don't know how to define that for him if he says we can't tell what's personal and what's business.
Just one follow-up question.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you say that when you're having meals that you were claiming, it's based just on mileage? You're not actually meeting with the client at lunch or
So,
anything like that?
are there meetings that happen during the lunch period and I'm carrying my fast food into it? Yes, there are. Is there a specific meeting that I'm having meetings with a coworker that is in the area and we're meeting up? Yes, there are those. But from the standpoint of an individual, if I've driven 350 miles in one day, where does personal come into play versus business? That's my question. Because I feel the tax code it does give that definition, or it's because I don't understand it. So I'm happy to be called stupid and whatever, but if I've driven 350 miles in one day, I have to eat. To me, that's a business expense.
Okay, and I can ask Mr. Catino to just address that one point, if you would, about how he differentiates between personal and business meals.
Sure. Just off the credit card statements alone, I don't, it's unclear, some of these expenditures, whether those were only a business, like he only used that credit card for business purposes, or whether that credit card was also commingled with personal use. And, for instance, if you go on a weekend meal or dinner or something like that, that wouldn't meet the definition of business purpose. And so it's unclear based on what has been provided, if these meals or if this was a credit card that was only used for business purposes, or whether there was also personal expenditures on the credit card statements.
The business doesn't give a corporate credit card.
Okay, so his answer is it's commingled, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Do you have anything further to add, or?
No, I just appreciate your time and your qualifiers.
So what I think the panel probably would like to do today is to leave the record open, and I'm going to ask that you try to obtain certain documents for us. And one of those would be that pay stub that's as close to the end of the year as you can.
Right.
I will ask you to look into getting the invoices, and if your attorney has an issue with them, they can be redacted. You can take out all the names and identifying
And
information.
leave the numbers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. And how much time will be allotted, because I do have
Well, my list
all
isn't
that.
done yet.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So you mentioned that people don't want to take many hours going through each one of your bank statement item lines and trying to figure out whether it was for utilities and whether it's personal or business. So looking at the RISE statement, if you do come up with that pay stub, it would be helpful to know the total mileage on that statement. So if you could go through that list and calculate the mileage on each one, and then calculate total mileage, then we can compare that to what you were reimbursed. And from the bank statements, you've got a whole year's worth of bank statements. Again, even if we did take the hours to go through and look at them, the panel couldn't tell what was for a business purpose and what that business purpose was. So if you could categorize that, that's probably a lesser amount in this whole thing, but.
And that's what that Excel spreadsheet that is referenced in that's what was given to the tax preparer. So that was the tabulation of those meals that was provided to. And so that's what, again, that was what the original submission was. Then they've come back and they've asked for additional, because they're basically saying, we don't understand the list. Am I miscategorizing what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm trying to find which one you're referring to see.
It's the exhibit that has totals of business expenses and,
Oh, you mean the spreadsheet that says Exhibit C for the Franchise Tax Board, Exhibit C?
It's Exhibit C, yes, but I think it's listed as, might be Appellant's Exhibit 6.
it's like a one-page,
Oh,
it's a
Appellant's
one-page
Exhibit
document.
1.
Yeah.
Appellant's Exhibit 1. Respondent's Exhibit C from the briefing.
Right.
So that's the thing that says tennis camp, health membership, weight.
All those items that have been
Okay.
separated out, and
Okay.
those are daycare costs. That's not business related. Those are daycare costs for kids.
Right. So, like for the meals on this, you just have a total?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's not cross-referenced to the
It's not saying
bank
this.
statement so that I
It's,
can...
it's the bank statements that show this is the place of business that this meal was purchased at for this amount, and then it's totaled into those categories. I don't have a separate document that says, on page 2, line 5, section A, where it says In-N-Out Burger for $9. I don't have any, that basically, it's highlight, go through the list, Palmdale, the cities that I'm driving, here's the total that was applied, that's why that was a business expense.
Okay.
That's what I did. I don't have any other write-ups, and I can do what you're asking.
So if you want to do
Yeah.
what we're asking.
Yes, ma'am.
You will have the opportunity to do that as long as we're keeping the record open for these other issues. It would just be helpful because then we can look at what, if you even circled on the bank statement, this was for a Bakersfield trip with this client or, whatever the case may be. So we'll give you that opportunity as well. Then the other thing that Mr. Catino referenced was the reimbursement policy that's noted on the addendum. Would that be something that you could get? That would be with RISE?
I will check with my attorney because that's what is part of the proceedings is, if you guys basically ruled that I owe, which that, whatever happens, happens, okay? I understand we're in the appeal process. If it's ruled that I owe, that document will probably go into, that ruling will go into my proceedings, because that's one of my points, is as an employee, I should not have to pay to play based upon California law and based upon all those things. And he's saying that it's incumbent upon me to substantiate. I agree, I can try to my best to substantiate per the tax definitions, but if the employer wants to choose not to pay, there's no really recollection on the habits and the sole discretion that he's mentioned as a corporation.
Okay.
In that employee addendum, it's at their sole discretion. It's not automatic. It means they want you to give it to them, and if their standpoint is, no, we only pay the client's reimbursed issues, their sole discretion means no,
Okay.
as an employer.
All right, so I've listed 5 things that you can choose to bring to us. How long do you think you'll need?
If it would please, could I have at least a minimum of 30, if not 45 days?
I'll give you 45.
Okay.
And then I'll give the Franchise Tax Board an opportunity, another 30, or do you want the same 45 to respond?
The same 45.
Okay, so I'll give the Franchise Tax Board 45 days to respond, which means this will be carried out another 3 months before we can even start deliberating and writing this, but
Now, if I submit it's sooner, because we have a holiday weekend this weekend, by the way. If I submit it sooner, will that clock stop?
yes, then we'll start Franchise Tax Board clock
Okay.
after you respond. So, yeah, you can speed it up, but what we call this at the Office of Tax Appeals is additional briefing. We're asking you for additional briefing. So I will, following this hearing, I will send out what we call an additional briefing letter, and I'll lay these out.
Recapping.
I'll lay those categories out for you that,
Thank you.
that we want you to produce, and we'll have the deadline in there as well.
Yeah. There was only one other thing that we had talked about in the admin teleconference, and that was Mr. Evan Stagg basically stating and admitting that the tax board had lost my file and basically would have not had this happen. He stated my lack of response. And my response was within 7 to 10 business days of the original request. And then it sat, meaning unfortunately the franchise board probably deals with a lot, that's to say the least. But as a taxpayer, I would expect a higher expectation on handling of files, because I know what my expectations are in the business world, and I know the typical response that I get if something is wrong is not the response that the state has allowed. So I would just like to make note of that somehow.
Well, it's now in the record.
That's why I noted it.
Okay.
We just have one final comment. I don't know if it'd be helpful to appellant, but there are a couple IRS publications just discussing auto mileage and business meals, so we just wanted to provide that, if possible, to appellant husband. It's IRS publication 463 that involves travel, gift, and car, and then publication 529 that deals with unreimbursed employee expenses.
Okay, that might help you to see what you're trying to show us, how you're trying to show us what you're trying to show us.
I understand it may help me, but if I have a different understanding of what those words mean in those publications than the gentleman off to the right, then that's where I'm gonna say, tax guy, help me out. Not this tax guy, but my tax preparer.
Right.
Because if he says everything that you've submitted, Les, is legitimate and it's understandable, and if the tax board doesn't believe you, you're stuck.
All right.
So-
Well, in my additional briefing letter, I'll just note those two publications. You can look at them if you want. You don't have to if you don't want to.
Oh, I'll look at them, but again, if I read the document and I come to the same conclusion that I'm at right now, we're still gonna be at the impasse. So that's my concern.
Well, maybe it'll help you to help us here on the panel instead.
Can I get paid for that?
Okay, so we are going to
That's smart.
adjourn this hearing, and we're not closing the record at this time. But at the point that we do close the record, for your information, Mr. Billings, we will issue a decision within at least 100 days.
Yeah.
Okay?
And the interest is still accruing, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't answer that.
No.
You should.
It is, and that's why I'm saying, that's why I'm asking, is because, that's why I said the response timeframe can start sooner.
Yes.
Thank you all for your time and taking the time out of your day to listen to your citizen.
Okay.
I greatly appreciate it, all of you. And to the back office, thank you very much. And to the lovely people on the right, I do hope you have a good day, but, it's always fun to talk to tax people.
Well, you're also on video, so
I know we
say
are.
hi to everybody.
I know we are.
Okay, thank you for coming.
Meeting adjourned?
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Because I won't leave until it's said.